Hi everyone, this is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today I'm going to talk about the meaning of the sun in the sign of Aquarius. Let me just show you on the screen really quick what we're looking at here. So first of all, you can see that the sun has just entered the sign of Sagittarius, Aquarius right here at 0 degrees. And typically the sun takes about 1 day to travel through 1 degree of the zodiac, which means that it takes about 30 days for the sun to travel through one whole sign. Now, that means, roughly every 30 days we get the sun in a new sign. So every time the sun is in that sign, in some ways the sun becomes the anchor of our interpretation when we're looking at transits month by month. And here's how. So the sun was called the organ of the soul's perception by Vettius Valens, and that has is widely accepted, and the same basic idea about the sun in relation to the soul as the light of consciousness or perception of the soul, of the higher self, of the spirit, is shared in both the East and the West in different ways. And so as the sun is traveling sign by sign, or right now just entering the sign of Aquarius, what we're going to start noticing is that our vision, our spiritual vision, which is not always apparent to us. Sometimes we have to have a spiritual practice, a regular meditation practice, just getting quiet on a daily basis in order to see it, will be coming from the sign of Aquarius. I keep wanting to say Sagittarius. So what that means is that we have to understand, how does the soul tend to see, or what does it tend to see, or what kind of archetypal lens is it looking through? Where the light is coming from, that's where the information is flowing. And so as the light moves through the different signs of the zodiac, the filter through which we perceive reality, the different archetypal layers and lens that we look through are changing. So in Aquarius, we're dealing with the fixed or solid, airy, masculine temple of Saturn. And so we have to know something about Saturn. We have to know something about air, even knowing a little something about the cupbearer, the water bearer, which is the constellation image associated with this mathematical portion of the zodiac, is important. When you put all of those things together, you get something like one of the time signature for the month, the beat that everything is moving along by, and the means by which the soul is perceiving the world and its experiences shifts slightly. Knowing what archetypal lens we're perceiving through, we can first of all just understand why we're having the experiences that we're having. They're rhythmic, they're cyclical, they come back, and so they're always a part of the larger process of the year that we're going through. Understanding why we're having them and understanding how they might push us off track, or how we might use those qualities to the benefit of our spiritual life. That's where knowledge of a sign really becomes handy. And that's why tracking the sun is also so important. So in the sign of Aquarius, one of the things that it helps to know, for starters, is the mythology of the water bearer. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the figure in mythology most commonly associated with the water bearer, with the sign of Aquarius, which is Ganymede. And I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Ganymede, I'm not sure. So at any rate, he is basically a figure who acts as the cupbearer to Zeus. Cupbearer is an incredibly important position in the ancient world. A cupbearer to a king or queen and so forth is basically the person who serves them, is very close to them, might taste and make sure they're not being poisoned by whatever's in their cup. So it plays this incredibly important role of intimacy and service to the ruler. And remember, the rulers are considered divine in many cases. So this is this very elevated position that the water bearer depicts. And yet the mythology of Ganymede is really, really interesting. So he's abducted basically by Zeus because Zeus covets his beauty and his youth. And there's a whole like homoerotic collection of literature actually on this subject that's very interesting as well if you want to go down that route with the myth. But for now, we're going to stick to something a little bit more general or broader, which is that the potential that Zeus sees in this young boy who's, I believe he's like a sheep herder or something like that. So he's kind of common roots, but it turns out that he is special. He's different and special in some way. He's seen that way by the gods, by God Zeus. He's seen as sort of more special than the rest, despite his seemingly humble appearance in the world. And so Zeus turns into an eagle, or sends an eagle, if I remember correctly. And anyway, he abducts Ganymede and Ganymede. Oh God, I wish I knew how to say it. Sorry, guys. At any rate, he abducts him and brings him up to heaven. He becomes the cupbearer. In this way, there's two things that are happening that are very complicated. One is that Ganymede is he is no longer a part of the human world, and so he's alienated from the human world. And there's potential even for jealousy among human beings when someone gets elevated up to a special position with the gods, right? But at the same time, you have this difficult position if you're the cupbearer of the gods, because you're still immortal. You are still immortal and you're not a god. So you're in this weird in-between space where you represent something special about the potential of human beings that elevates you or separates you from the rest of human beings. And yet at the same time, there's something fundamentally different or other that doesn't quite qualify you to be a god. So there you are in this marginal and somewhat potentially lonely position. And that's the archetypal quality that is so embodied within the sign of Aquarius. Another thing that you can think about, so for example, actually before I go on, Aquarius will always tend to bring up this feeling that there is the potential for something progressive, enlightened, better, something that is above or beyond the status quo, that reaches to a different height of human experience, achievement, intellect, art, music, anything at all that can kind of take it to the next level. And yet often the stigma around people who take something beyond the current limits or to the next level, idealists, progressivists, etc., is that they become ostracized, alienated, misunderstood, outcasts. Their uniqueness puts them closer to the gods, closer to the realm of the gods in some ways, but it also alienates them from the realm of people that they still belong to. And so often Aquarius embodies the rebel, misfit, the one who's marginalized, alienated, different, outsider, but someone who also, their uniqueness is quite clearly attractive. It is cherished or loved or even coveted, which sort of Zeus does, while also, in some ways, that thing that we covet in the Aquarian, let's say the Aquarius energy, is the very thing that ends up making them feel ostracized or alienated or like they don't have a place to fit in. So that's some complex symbolism, right? And it's not just good. It's not always like people take this story and they say, yeah, so Aquarius is like the visionary, progressive dreamer who doesn't fit in. And that's true to a certain extent, but there are many people around the world who could say that they felt that way about themselves, who were advancing ideas of progress that many other people would find completely disagreeable. For example, I always go back to the fact that when Sarah Palin was running for office with, I think it was John McCain, when Obama was running, I think this was back in 2008, if I remember correctly. She's got a bunch of sort of some good Aquarius energy in her chart, you could say. And she thought of herself certainly as a progressive, and many people in the Republican Party would have considered her this kind of progressive voice, a woman. It's kind of, at that time, it was even more unique than it is now for a woman to be sort of running as VP. And many people, obviously, on the other side of the political spectrum would look at her and go like, there's nothing progressive about you. Do you know what I mean? So with Aquarius, it's not just that everything is progressive and visionary and outside of the box and like, so person gets alienated for being so ahead of everyone else in a positive way. It's also just the general theme of feeling like you're doing something different or progressive and feeling like you don't fit in, regardless of what the vision is. Tyrants, dictators, mass murderers could feel that way. That's my point. I'm not saying that that's who Sarah Palin is. I'm just saying, that it's relative. So that's an Aquarian theme. Now, this also relates quite intimately to the symbolism of Saturn. Saturn is a planet that's highly misunderstood in modern astrology. One of the reasons for that is that we don't understand the unique role that Saturn played in the overall cosmology of ancient astrology, where Saturn is the boundary keeper between the visible and invisible, between a lower realm of divinity and a higher realm of divinity. In this case, Saturn is always talked about as structures, like that, and discipline and tradition and conservatism and stuff like that. But Saturn is actually also the demarcator, the boundary keeper between what's inside, accepted, popular, status quo, and what's outside, alien, marginalized, cast out, opposed, exercised, heretical, and so forth. So Saturn is the scapegoat, and Saturn is the, Saturn is an African American during the civil rights movement, right? But Saturn is also could be thought of as the status quo that wants to segregate and keep, in the earlier part of the last century wants, oh, you have to swim in a separate pool, or you have to drink from different water, or go to a different bathroom, or sit in a different portion of the bus, because here's where the boundary is. This is the status quo, and you're outside of it somehow. So Saturn has always represented both hermits, isolated, creative introverts, mystics, people who are cast out, heretical, different, marginalized, as well as those who cling to and revere the status quo tradition and who hold on to oppositional tensions in order to wall out or keep out what they feel is different. Saturn, in this sense, is a dual symbol, and this is why Saturn is also associated with the god, with Janus, the double-facing god who looks forward and backward at once. Saturn was the ruler of the golden age, is usurped by Zeus, kicked out, and forever looking back at that golden age with sort of like, anger that it was taken away, you could say. Manilius talks about it this way poetically in his book, The Astronomica, famous astrological treatise. Saturn is a planet that says, in Aquarius, therefore, you can relate this to the myth of Ganymede, and you can see that the idea of being different, being alien, being other, and that potentially being a very good thing, a progressive thing, also something that can put you on the outskirts of society, or that can make you like a stranger in a strange land, and so forth. So when we have, in about a year from now, we have Jupiter and Saturn coming together into a conjunction in the sign of Aquarius, and that conjunction is going to be about, this sense of this kind of triumphant sense of like building a new order, a new moral and philosophical and spiritual vision, and it will either be incredibly, progressive but alien or foreign, or in some way you have that feeling from Jupiter and Saturn getting together in Aquarius. Or the possibility is, and this is unfortunate duality of this sign, is that you could see the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction being about the expansion and doubling down on a vision that's very conservative or rigid. So it's a hard one to predict. But you know that this coming through in December is quite a big deal in the history of astrology. These Saturn Jupiter conjunctions are a big deal. Anyway, typically there's something that feels very avant-garde or, you know, beyond the status quo, especially when Jupiter comes in with Saturn, you know, in a sign like Aquarius. But anyway, I'll be doing a lot more, many more videos on that as the year progresses. But so the other thing that you have to remember about Aquarius is the seasonal quality. So at this time of year in the Northern Hemisphere, where the archetypal symbolic language of astrology emerges, you're you're still in the yin half of the year, meaning yin is dominant, but now you are moving into a period of time from Capricorn to Pisces where yang is returning, even though yin is still dominant. So this is called the yang of the yin. I call it, that's the easy way to think about it anyway, which is that yang is increasing, though yin is still dominant. And the middle portion of that season of increase, which is winter, the middle portion of that season is Aquarius, which means there's a slow, steady, fixed, methodical way in which yang is returning from within the yin. And that is exactly what the image of progress is on an archetypal level. There's so many images in the I Ching that confirm this as well. So, for example, we know that the hexagram number 24 in the I Ching called return shows a yang line at the bottom of all yin, and this is about the seed of yang starting to grow and emerge and rise up. That rising of the yang is solid, fixed, determined, steady in the sign of Aquarius. So it's an idea of light emerging. And what is light? It means the assertion of something new in time and space in these material cycles. Yang returning, yang rising in a steady manner means there's an injection of action and change in the direction of some kind of development, growth, progress, etc., from out of the yin, which means from out of a more passive or static form or structure. And so when you look at things in that manner, what you're basically talking about is the same exact archetype that we talked about with Saturn and the mythology of the cupbearer, the water bearer, which is you have some promising, the picture of the promising youth rising up towards heaven from a humble, lowly beginning. That's the yang emerging in the season of yin, in the overall time of yin, yang steadily emerging upward. You also have the idea of progress from some previous held tradition, belief, or structure, and the feeling of the need that some new idea, which may end up being marginalized, is trying to assert itself and come forward out of the previously existing status quo. That's part of the solar archetypal seasonal dynamic of the year. So all of that, in addition to the fact that Saturn itself is a planet that often represents the margins or boundaries between progress and the status quo. It polarizes us between the two. Saturn is the planet that rules the aspect of opposition, polaric tension. And so Saturn, not just about structure, also about the battle between structure and newness, which is why Saturn's natural archetypal buddy is Jupiter, and also why Jupiter is the planet that overthrows the old kingdom and the old world of Saturn. So Saturn always has to do with what's old, accepted, familiar, and the polarization and feeling like an outcast in some way, potentially, if you're on the other side of that. So famous Saturn and Aquarius individual, what was it, Nina Simone? I think it was Nina Simone. And Nina Simone, obviously, this was a character who, let me just double check on that really quick, but I'm pretty sure it was Nina Simone who was this, this jazz artist, basically, who her family didn't, she had Saturn in the first house in Aquarius. Her family didn't want her singing jazz music because they thought it was the devil's music. And so there was this sense of like, you definitely can't sing jazz music. But at the same exact time, let me just look and make sure I've got that right. Yeah. So, yeah, it was Nina Simone. So on the one hand, the sort of white music industry was not so hip on majorly successful African American woman, killing it. But on the other hand, so there was a sense in which she was challenging the status quo of the music industry. On the other hand, because she was doing that, she was also something, she was already an outsider in a way for doing that, but she also ended up establishing a status quo and something that became very popular. And then she also was in some ways ostracized from her own family because they didn't like jazz music. They didn't think it was Christian enough. So, that Saturn in the first house in Aquarius, right on the ascendant, right? So that gives you a feeling for, the Saturn archetype basically. But that's what we're looking at in Aquarius. So, okay, let's zoom out now. We've kind of explored some of the dynamics of Aquarius. And I'm really like sitting here feeling so uncomfortable that I can't say the Greek name of the guy. I feel like I'm going to use one of those, how you can look up words and then hear someone pronounce it 5 times. So Ganymede, 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 maybe it's Ganymede. Anyway, if anyone knows how to speak, properly pronounce that Greek name, please let me know. Anyway, we've explored some of his mythology, the seasonal archetypal symbolism, the symbolism of Saturn in this sign. So that should give you some feelings. But now let's talk about it in terms of how to apply the meaning of the sun being in that sign. So for the 30 days while the sun is in that sign, here's what you can notice, especially over the next couple of days as the sun is not only in the sign of Aquarius, but is squaring the planet Uranus in Taurus. Uranus is a planet that modern astrologers actually also associate with the sign of Aquarius. I don't believe that's a good idea. I've given lots of soapbox rants about why I don't believe outer planets should be given sign rulerships, but so I won't go off on that right now. It's tempting. But nevertheless, there are some archetypal similarities between the sign of Aquarius and the mythology and archetypal symbolism of Saturn and so forth that we just discussed, and Uranus. First of all, Uranus by name is associated with the succession mythology of Uranus, Kronos, Zeus. But Uranus is a planet that has a lot to do more so with the defiant, eccentric, disruptive breaking of norms and standards and revolution, but it can be very sudden and sort of unexpected and erratic energy with Uranus. It's a little electrical. Anyway, for the next couple of days, as the sun goes through the square to Uranus, you may feel that really intensifying energy. And oftentimes it manifests through the soul's perception. Remember, the sun kind of indicates how we might in general be seeing the world around us, or through what lens we're seeing it at the moment. Through the lens of progress, defiance, radical sudden epiphanies and breakthroughs. I did a video on Mercury and the Sun square Uranus just a couple of days ago that you could watch if you wanted to hear more about that. But that's the next couple of days as the sun just enters Aquarius. And then there's 30 full days, right? In general, when the sun is in the sign of Aquarius, it is a good time to consider new ideas, progressive new considerations about how to do something, to be inventive, and to look at the status quo and think about how it can be updated or how things could be taken to the next level. And so anything that's about progress from the status quo, or the desire to make a change to something from the past, you may feel that, and that could be constructively used. On the other hand, we have to be careful because there is something of a divine rebel and in Aquarius. And, what can we say? Sometimes we're like Zeus, who is sort of coveting some potential that we see in something. And sometimes, when we covet the potential for something in the future, we're really taking ourselves out of the current moment. So, the sad part about the cupbearer is that while he's coveted by the gods and eventually made immortal as the water pourer by Zeus, he's taken out of his humble earthly home. And even though he has a special duty, he sort of becomes property of a higher god. Sometimes when we get obsessed or suddenly fixated on the moment of inspiration or some progressive idealistic vision that we have, we don't recognize the fact that it is stealing us away from the ground of our reality, that it's abducting us, and that a god or a archetypal force is possessing us, in which case we become like the abducted youth, full of potential, but also getting wrapped up in the agenda of something that we're pretending to understand. So it not only does it alienate us from other people sometimes to have progressive visions that aren't accepted by the status quo, that's one version of it, but another version is that it can take us away from ourselves. It can take us away from humble, simple, contented living. So we have to be a little bit aware of that. We can alienate ourselves, in other words, from other people by being too obsessed with the future or with progress. I can't tell you how many times a day through Instagram or the different social media outlets that I post on that I see people saying, you're good enough, you're awesome, progress, evolve, develop, grow, kick butt, blah, blah, blah. And so much of what's beneath that on one level, let's call it the unfortunate level of those memes, is the way in which we're constantly telling ourselves that we're not enough right now, or that communion in the heart with our source in simple, quiet, humble ways is not inherently just as blissful, if not more blissful, than constantly thinking about what we can do or what we can grow or what we can accomplish in the future, which often alienates us from the ground of our own being. And then we feel like outsiders or wanderers in our own skin or in our own hearts. So you have to be very careful of that with the sign of Aquarius. There is also sometimes, a chip on the shoulder that we carry intentionally. We build our egos upon feeling like an outsider, feeling different, feeling progressive. It's the one thing I don't love, even though I consider myself a liberal politically, that I don't love about liberal politics sometimes. I don't like really any politics a lot of the times, but one of the things I don't like about, sort of I would call like my liberal companions in the world, and just I'm talking about in the media and in the places where we show up in sort of herd mentality, I guess, is that we're building our egos up on being marginalized. And I think that it's unhealthy. I think it can be sneaky, the way in which we can build up our ego basically on anything. So if we feel like, for example, I know a lot of people are really feeling not so great about the fact that, they don't like Donald Trump, for example. They're like, oh, I really don't like Donald Trump. But if we build that up into a platform of self-righteousness, that I don't like this person and he's wrong and I'm right, that is just as toxic for the ego, if that makes sense, than anything I believe that we could sit and point a finger at someone else for. I know that's a radical position to some people, but that's an Aquarian dynamic. And I'm very familiar with it. I have a whole family of Aquarians, and my own midheaven is an Aquarius. So I think we have to be really careful that our visions of progress are necessary in life. It's fine that it's a reality that sometimes we're going to be outsiders or sometimes we're going to be outcasts. It's hard but necessary to stay humble and to stay connected to the ground of our being despite that. I wonder if our cupbearer in the sky with Zeus, for example, longed for the sheep that he used to tend, and that there's something very exhausting about being special and different all the time. It's actually wearying. On the other hand, clinging too closely to the status quo, and being afraid of anything new or different because we don't want to be not liked. We don't want someone to not give us the thumbs up. That's a problem as well. So we're perceiving these archetypal dichotomies for the next 30 days. They're there. They may be more or less subtle or, more or less apparent or obvious. Whenever the sun moves through a sign, I always just like to look at the whole sign house it's traveling through in my birth chart. And then I like to, take a look at what's there naturally in that house and sign, and know that that part of my chart, that part of my life, that karmic field in my life is basically being highlighted. And with the sun, there's always deeper messages to and from the soul, which is why it's so important per sign to tap into what the sun is doing, but not just that, but to have a practice where the organ of the soul can actually see. Here's the simplest way that we cover the organ of the soul, the perception of the soul. It is by moving from one thing to the next without any kind of self-reflection. It is by moving from one thing to the next, always judging what's good or bad without taking the time to be appreciative for everything or having some practice of gratitude. The other way that we remain covered by time and space and the material energy and our souls just go around on a hamster wheel is if we don't have a spiritual practice that is deliberately about learning to open the eye of the soul, which is like a muscle. You can't just sit down and open it. Thinking about it is not opening it. Really having it open happens because of practice of some kind. When we do that, the sun becomes a constant stream of information that's guiding us. That's like the compass on a ship, or that is like, the light of the sun pointing us toward the eastern or western direction. It gives us bearing. So following the sun like this is it's always really important. I hope this gives you some good things to think about. I'd love to hear your insights about Aquarius in the comments section. If someone could do me the amazing favor of telling me how to pronounce our water bearer's name, I will be forever thankful. I almost cut the video. I was like, almost like, I can't make this video if I don't know his name. But then I was like, no, I might ever just get through it. So tell me his name if you can help me with that. What is it like being an Aquarius sun, moon, rising for you? How have you experienced these energies? Like I said, I'd love to hear from you guys. I hope you all have a great Aquarius season, especially these first couple days as the sun squares Uranus. Should be very electrifying. Okay, take care, everyone.